So we're here at Downtown Book and Sound with local author Joshua Converse, and he's here with his brand new book, Manny's Daughter, and it is a sequel to his other book, if I can hold it up correctly, The Diana Strain. There we go. So Joshua, we're going to hand it over to you. Thanks for joining us, folks. Everyone that's here.
Thank you. Thank you. So yes, last October, you may remember things were pretty dark. There wasn't a lot of fun in the world, at least not for me. We had transferred over, I teach, and so we had transferred over to electronic teaching, and it wasn't for me. Didn't love it. So I thought, I have this book that I mostly finished in a month doing National Novel Writing Month. And maybe I should put it out into the world as something nice, something to feel good about, something positive to do. That is, put out a fun story into the world. The premise is essentially that, as happens periodically, Highway 1 goes out around Big Sur, north of Big Sur or south of Big Sur, and it's sort of cut off from the outside world, and it's quite remote. Cell towers don't tend to work there very well. It's very rugged wilderness. Special forces teams go to places like Big Sur to train for rough terrain, right? It's a serious country when you get out there. And I thought, what if while they were cut off and it was the full moon, murder started to happen, and comes out, this isn't a human thing. These appear to be animal attacks, but animal attacks don't feature opposable thumbs. What's going on? It's a werewolf. And all werewolf stories have something of the detective novel of the whodunit. Who's the werewolf, right? That's the big reveal. And so I thought, I'll write that story. So that's the story I wrote, and I put it out last year because wanted to do something that felt positive to me, right? And put out a fun story. And people seem to like it. They seem to think it was a pretty fun read. And so, of course, the question that the next book tries to answer is, okay, what happens when there's a dead werewolf specimen that the government gets a hold of? What are they going to do with it? This is not meant to be as topical as it's turning out to be. But they're going to weaponize it. Of course they're going to weaponize it. So this is sort of the story of the survivors of this book dealing with the curse that is lycanthropy, the Diana strain, as they call it in the book, and how those survivors are dealing with their curse, and how that curse is being expanded out to a lot more people because the government's got its hooks into it and they think it'll be a useful weapon. And so that's sort of the backdrop of the story and the scope of the thing. Now, in the Diana strain, we learn that there's a military order within the Roman Catholic Church that's existed for about 1,000 years that specifically has designated itself to hunt the things that hunt humanity. The things that go bump in the night, that kind of thing, right? And we see them in action, and I think that's pretty fun. So they're still in this story, they feature. And in fact, one of the ways, or the primary way that the government gets a hold of this is because one of the high-level members of the order, called the Gladius Dei, the Sword of God, goes rogue, decides recruitment is bad. I mean, look at the Catholic Church now. Recruitment for priests is down, much less priests who then have to go face down giant monsters, right? So that's hard to get. And so he wants to make a deal, soldiers for this specimen, thinking maybe he's doing something good for the order, even though he's breaking a big rule. He's supposed to be quiet about these things. And so I think I'm going to read an excerpt from sort of the coming together of these forces and what that looks like in the book. So this is early in the book, chapter 6, Our Sort of People. Morning, Tuesday, June 13, 2017, the Arbor Room, Seasons, Washington, D.C. When they all sat down with Senator Friedman, the senator ordered coffee and the apple butter oatmeal, explaining that his wife had him on a strict diet after his heart attack last year, but that on no account should they, as newcomers, miss the Eggs Benedict here at Seasons. The Arbor Room was private and had its own entrance for the sake of discretion, which was always in short supply among the power brokers of the capital. The matters they were to discuss required nothing less, and even so, the senator assured them he had the room swept for listening devices. Each man had switched off his phone and put it in a Faraday bag in an outside closet. After the waitstaff had come and gone and each man's order was steaming before him, the stately, silver-haired Senator Friedman began. The people in this room ought to know each other. I'm glad I could help it happen. He gestured to his right at the graying man in a priest's collar and cassock. This is Cardinal Donovan Fry, attached to the Archdiocese here in Washington. Cardinal Fry, here Senator Friedman gestured to his left toward the bony, sharp-angled man with high cheekbones and green jade ice chips for eyes in a blue Brooks Brothers suit and yellow power tie. This is Armin Weinman, formerly of Blackwater and now heading up a biotech outfit called ProGen Global. Weinman and Cardinal Fry shook hands, and Weinman gestured toward the fourth man at the table. And this, I'm sure you gentlemen know, is Dr. Robert Lannon, our senior researcher and probably the most preeminent geneticist on the planet. Lannon was lanky and slightly disheveled in an off-white button-down shirt, wrinkled slacks, and off-the-rack gray herringbone sports coat. He wore round spectacles that seemed to fall perpetually around his nose. His eyes were blue and vastly intelligent. They stood and shook hands among themselves, exchanged pleasantries, and sat. Gentlemen, said Senator Friedman, I'm so glad we could come together this morning and put in motion a project that may very well revolutionize modern warfare, medicine, and bioengineering. He looked at Cardinal Fry. Cardinal Fry, why don't you start us off? The elder man bowed his head in acknowledgement of the senator and said in a quiet voice, I had a cadaver, a specimen in deep freeze that represents an organism known in folklore and to members of my order, but until this morning, unknown to science. He may be of interest to you gentlemen. In life, he went by the name Billy Hatfield. What kind of organism? Asked Weinman. A lycanthrope, said the Cardinal Weinman, and Dr. Lennon exchanged a look. A werewolf? Asked Weinman, cocking an eyebrow. He turned from the Cardinal and to the Senator. Senator, I assume you didn't call this meeting to waste our time. Mr. Weinman, Armin, I was just as skeptical as you are, but the Cardinal has provided incontrovertible evidence of what he is claiming, said Senator Friedman. Are we talking about a creature that looks human and then physically changes into a wolf? Asked Dr. Lennon. Yes, said Cardinal Fry, but let me explain more fully. My order has existed since roughly the 11th century, but gained official recognition by the Mother Church from the Holy See in the 12th century. Since those days, we've hunted monsters in a holy crusade to protect the world from the forces of evil. Among the things we have fought are what you might call werewolves. They're rare in these times, but they do exist. And we kill them where we find them because their disease is communicable through sexual contact, bodily fluids, injury by their teeth or claws, and so on. I realize this seems incredible, but consider for a moment the tales of these beings or beings of a similar sort exist in almost every culture. They remain unknown to science primarily because we cover up the truth in an effort to protect the world. And we are, not to be immodest, a very efficient group. Weinman broke in. Let's say all that's true, okay? So werewolves exist, and we don't know it because there are not many of them around, and when they draw attention, you sanitize the area and spin the story. It's far-fetched, but okay. For the sake of argument and the purposes of this conversation, I'll momentarily buy it. At any rate, I'll continue to assume a man as serious and busy as Senator Friedman here didn't put me in a room with you for fun and games, or because he really likes the oatmeal here. Fine. You want to offer us a specimen? You're a senior member of this secret Catholic order that's covered things up for 900 years. Why would you give us a body instead of throwing it down the furnace or whatever your SOP is? The Cardinal nodded and smiled with untrammeled politeness, adjusted his sleeve for a moment, then answered. I'll be honest, Mr. Weinman. I will try to be as direct as you have been. My order once recruited from European knights and sell swords and the rougher breeds of the rustic priesthood the world over. In these times, the church has made many compromises. I will not speak ill of Mother Church, but I have been a more than somewhat vocal opponent of many of the newer policies. In particular, I've been strongly against the unofficial code of silence around sexual crime in the priesthood. And by that, I mean I've classified certain predatory priests who come to my attention as monsters and had them handled as we handle such beasts. This has made me politically unpopular in the College of Cardinals and elsewhere in the political labyrinth that is the Vatican. It has hurt funding, and it has hurt recruitment. We are a small order with a long reach, but the loss of hunters in our dangerous work means we must always be training replacements, new soldiers to take up the cause. Many doors once open to the Gladius Dei are now closed. In the interest of fighting our holy crusade, new ideas must be considered regarding our vows of secrecy. I will lay aside tradition in this instance. Making this deal, I have requests. Dr. Lennon and Mr. Weinman looked at each other, then at Senator Friedman, who nodded his encouragement to them. This was real. So things get fun from there. As bad things happen to bad people and also to some pretty good people. And I think I've said this before elsewhere, but my idea of what this was, this lycanthropy thing, sort of, it's not something that you could negotiate with. It's not an alternative lifestyle. It's not, as in Teen Wolf, a metaphor for puberty, or as in The Howling of sexual aggression. It's not those things. It's a curse. Like Larry Talbot in The Wolfman is cursed, right? And the best thing that can happen to Larry Talbot is that his father will beat him to death with a stick with a silver handle before he kills the girl, or transmits the curse onto somebody else. So that's sort of been my model, because I think, reality is pretty unreasonable, and unreasonable things happen to us every day. You get a cancer diagnosis, or something happens that you can't control. It's terrible, and you can't negotiate with it. And so that's sort of been my guiding light. It means that, sometimes rough things have to happen in these books, but it's not without hope, I think. There are always survivors who try to do some kind of good by their own lights, or preserve some kind of love as they understand it. And I think that describes the world as I see it. There is great darkness, but there's also hope. And there are also people who are carrying a fire into that darkness. So that's how I feel about the framework, I suppose, the cosmology of the world, if that makes sense. Yeah, I hope you find it so. If there are questions, I'm happy to entertain questions. Otherwise, thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Could you do me a favor and talk a little bit about your process?
Sure.
I know you've talked a little bit about it before, but now we're on the internet and
Hi, internet. Yeah.
Live on Facebook.
So I found that it's been useful when I start a new project or a new book. I'll get a blank book, and I'll put everything, all my thoughts, all my notes, and even pictures or calendar information, moon phases, locations, images that strike me as useful in some way, and I'll put them all into one place for that book, for that idea, for that story. And that's been really useful, because when I'm in the middle of writing something and I want to, okay, what's the date? And then I don't have to click off into the internet and risk being distracted away from whatever it is that I was doing. It's all here, and I can just go, this is it, right? If I'm reading a magazine or something like that, as long as it's my magazine, and I find something that's, that's useful to know about range of a rifle or something like that, I can cut it out and put it in the book. So I'm sort of always halfway thinking about, does this apply to what I'm doing? And if it does, I can kind of grab it and put it in one repository. And then it's there for me when I want to decide something further in the novel, or double check myself and make sure I'm being consistent about something. And so I've done this. This book really represents Monty's Daughters and the Diana strain. So, but it's full. It's all the way full. And so, being at the end, I did start a new book for the third one, because it's a trilogy. Right? The first book asks, okay, Big Sur's the haunted house, and there's a werewolf in it. Who survives? What happens? And if the second book asks, what will the government do when they get a specimen of dead werewolf? The answer is they're going to try to weaponize it. And so we worked that out. And so book 3, The Sons of Fenris, which is in production, in the early stages of production, I grant you, that asks the question, okay, once they have it as a weapon, what are they going to do? What happens? And what happens if, like, the G4 all have it? What happens then? And we've sort of been there. You know, I was talking to fellow author Elle Otero recently, and asked, by the way, go read her stuff. She's great. But I asked, you know, you think about Truman and the way that Harry Truman, you know, after FDR dies and the war is ongoing, and the island fighting is extremely costly, right? The Japanese are not giving an inch of ground, and so there's just a lot of Marines are dying, just droves as they're pushing in, and we're wondering, like, what's going to happen when we hit the mainland, right? We're talking about a tremendous death toll on the American side for this last gasp of the war. And they must have sat Truman down in a briefing and said to him, by the way, we have this thing that we've been working on out in the desert. And he didn't know about this. He didn't know about the Manhattan Project, right? No, almost nobody did except the people who were involved. And then to sit him down and go, so we've got this thing. We can split atoms with it. At first, when we were experimenting, we weren't sure if it was going to cause a chain reaction in the atmosphere that burned the Earth away into nothing. But we took a chance.
And yet.
And it all worked out. Would you like to use this thing? By the way, tick, tick, tick. People are dying right now. What do you want to do? And Truman had to make some kind of decision. Now, you can have been in government a long time and have done many things and made many reigns, but there ain't no education that's going to prepare you for that question. There just isn't. No human being has ever been prepared for that question. And he's the one who got to decide. And you can agree or disagree with his decision. But I often think about the moment that somebody placed that in his lap and said, whatever you want to do, we'll do. And so I think that idea, that moment, may inform to some extent the way that the next book goes. Because can you imagine placing such a thing at the hands of not only an American president, but the power structures of the CCP in China, or in the power structures of Putin and his oligarchs in Russia? What does that look like? How did the British handle it? And each answer is different, but each answer is related to everybody else's answer because it's all, you know, a geopolitical question. So the next book looks more like Tom Clancy, and the scope is expanded considerably, but it's still this horror, thriller, supernatural, occult, and there's spiritual dimensions, obviously, to all 3 stories that I'm not going to tell you in case you haven't read. But they're in there, and you'll know them when you see them. So that's basically the process. Yes,
If I can.
please.
How many pages do you write a day? Is there any consistency? I'm going to pretend I don't answer.
Right. I mean, in a perfect world, you could sit down and you could write 5, 6, 10 pages a day, every day. And if you don't have anything else going on, or you've built your life in such a way where that's a possibility, that's great. For me, obviously, my dad, my wife sometimes wants me to talk to her, which is nice. She still likes to talk to me. That's good. I have work. Obviously, I teach, and teaching and grading English papers is quite time consuming. So it's difficult to do, particularly during the semester. And then when the semester's over, you sort of just want to curl up into a ball and, let Christmas wash over you. And I teach during the summer as well. So it's tough. In times past, I've done National Novel Writing Month and been able to churn out. Both books mostly came together in 30 days while I was doing National Novel Writing Month in November. And that the goal there is 1,667 words a day. If you do that for 30 days, you'll have a 50,000 word manuscript at the end. And I think everybody should try that. Anybody who wants to be a writer really ought to give it a shot. I think it's hugely useful. It's happening now, but I'm so busy, I cannot do it this year.
6 days behind, you gotta get it. Not impossible.
Yeah, it's not impossible. I know a guy who almost didn't sleep through November and ended up with something like 140,000 words,
Oh, wow.
which is incredible. He really didn't sleep. I think there's probably brain damage associated with that, but he managed it. So the answer is it depends, right? I know I would like to sit down and bang out 5 or 6 pages a day, but if that doesn't happen, get in where you fit in. I try to carry always a journal with me or a little book and jot things down as they occur to me. You hear a conversation, or you hear something somebody says, and go, oh, that's a good line, right? Or it'll prompt a question. So, you'll put things in there like that. And then when you go home, open a document, whatever that is. So that's generally my process, and it's not as disciplined or as consistent as I would like it to be. But mostly writers are not metronomes. Mostly artists are not metronomes, right? We have seasons and we have interests, and the things that overwhelm you in one season will inform what you write in the next. So I would say, however you get there, as long as you get there, right? Yeah.
So inspiration. 2 ways to look at it. One is don't wait for it to strike, just get writing. And the other way is do all these things to make it happen. Or wait for it to happen, wait till you get struck. What is your take on how do you handle inspiration or inspiration's failure to show up?
I think if you want to be inspired, the thing to cultivate is not inspiration, it's curiosity. I think the more curious you are about things, the more you want to know about the world and people. People in and of themselves, I think, I contain multitudes, right? So just one person is totally fascinating. And we're all interacting and bouncing against each other in this life. Meanwhile, somebody invented something called the Hubble telescope and pointed it at a black place in the sky, and there was the Horsehead Nebula. That's just out there, spinning the cosmos, and nobody had ever seen it before, and suddenly our generation got to see it, because we happen to be on the planet right now. That sort of thing is happening all the time. And if you're awake to that kind of curiosity and wonder about how deep everything in the world really is and how little we know about it, then things are going to come out of you because you know that, and you're always awake to it. So I would say, if you want to be inspired, get curious, ask a lot of questions, read widely and deeply, talk to lots of different people who know things you don't know and think things you don't think. And then at some point, like a sponge, you'll be so full that it'll just start to run out of you. You'll start to write things because it's in you to write them, because you put it there with your wonder and your curiosity and your interest in this world. Even if it's fiction, it deals with things that are real. Why do our monsters emerge when they emerge? Well, it's no secret that, to further a metaphor we've already discussed, why would Godzilla suddenly be such a popular monster in the 1950s in Japan? Well, it's no secret as to why, right? It has everything to do with the atomic bomb, that a monster would emerge then. Why would shape-shifting be such a theme for the Celts if they weren't concerned about maintaining an identity? Which they were, because they had come from, the goddess Danu. They had a goddess named Danu, D-A-N-U, that comes from the Danube River, way over in Eastern Europe, right? And the Celts end up on the Iberian Peninsula. They end up in Wales. They end up in Ireland, right? On the far end of the continent. All that travel and all that war and the Romans, all the rest of it. Why would the shape-shifting stories keep coming up? Well, because they're trying to maintain an identity and a tribal self amidst all of these hostile forces in a hostile world, right? So the monsters we have say a lot about the fears of our culture. And so fiction tells certain kinds of truth better than nonfiction does sometimes.
So why do vampires come out then? What are we afraid of?
Yeah, so a lot of the Eastern European vampire and Balkan vampire fear emerges at the same time as plagues. And the story is often something like, and more so obviously if they're something like, the Red Death or something like that, where there's a lot of blood. But the story often goes something like this. Papa is away in the forest, and he comes home and he's not himself, and he's very pale and he has a faraway look. He goes to bed early. And then when Mama comes to bed, she doesn't get up in the morning, but when she does wake up after the sun's gone down, she's very pale and she's not paying much attention to the children. And then the children fall sick and it's very mysterious. And then the village falls sick and it's very mysterious. And so that's a vampire story, but it's also a story of disease, a mysterious disease. We don't know where it comes from. We don't know what it is. It sucks the life out of people, right? So I think that's not the whole explanation of vampirism, because there's a whole psychosexual thing I'm not even going to, but that's a
Don't
part,
even go there.
That's a part of why that emerges. And it also shows up during times of sexual hysteria, right? For other reasons as well.
And werewolves too, or that's more of a.
Well, I think in and I touch on this in the Diana strain, because the disease emerges in Scandinavia, and that's in part because the stories of werewolves that circulated often in northern England were as a result of Viking raids where men were dressed as wolves or as bears and came in and just ransacked and raped and pillaged and destroyed and took slaves and left nothing behind, but ash. And so there was a famous Northern English prayer, God save us from the fury of the Northmen. And so I think a lot of the werewolf folklore that comes to us out of Britain has something to do with that Celtic shape-shifting thing, and also with that fear of the Northmen and the Viking berserkers go into this death trance and just be like animals, and they rip people apart with their hands. They're wild. So that's, I think, probably where a lot of the werewolf tradition comes in for us. And then, being American, we also get some of the American Indian folklore where there were tribes that had things like the Wendigo, right? And the Wendigo was something that snatched you up on a cold winter's night. You'd be see footprints in the snow and then no more footprints when the wind was howling. And so it's a metaphor for the hunger of the winter, the hunger of the north wind. And we characterize it as this beast because it's like a beast that devours, right? And it's in a meta devouring sense, obviously, because if you're hungry, you want to devour. And so you understand the strength of that desire. So, I mean,
Oh,
I'm
fascinating.
oversimplifying a bit, but more or less, all of these stories have places that come out of real things that describe real fear and real obstacles for us. And so we characterize them in story shapes. In the shape of the werewolf or the vampire come the real fears that we live with in our moment. You know, hence Romero's Dawn of the Dead, when they're all in the shopping mall. They lock themselves into the shopping mall. And he's not being subtle about it. He hits you right over the head, right? That this consumerism thing makes you a zombie. Who are the zombies? The people in the mall, even though they're surrounded by a sea of the undead outside who want to devour. But what are they doing? They're mindlessly pushing shopping carts around outside, waiting to devour, right? So Romero makes it quite explicit.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah, he's pretty fun. He was a fun guy. Any other questions or no?
One follow-up.
Oh, one follow-up.
Do
Okay.
you ever get writer's block?
Writer's block. Yeah. Yes. And usually it's because I don't want to do whatever I think I have to do right now. Like, you know, there was a part of this story that held me up, one chapter that held me up for a year and a half. Well, must have been less than that because we're a year away. So, but no, because I wrote it before. So yeah, like a year and a half. Because I didn't want to do it. You know, there was something in there that was going to be upsetting to me. I like this character, whatever. But I think
Just what chapter is that?
You'll find out.
you'll find out. You'll know it when you see it. But the thing is, we do these things because we have a story to tell, right? And if you're blocked, it's because you don't want to tell that story to yourself. Maybe you need to get a running start at it. Maybe you look at it from a different angle. Maybe the story you don't want to tell is because it's not your authentic story you're trying to tell, and you take another look at how you might do it. But I think most of the time, the idea that writer's block is some kind of a malady that creeps in and you just can't write a word about anything at all. The block isn't about writing. It's about something else. Not that I would put anybody on the couch and try and work out what it is, but I think you have to take a step back and say, what is it about this story that isn't working? Or what is it about me that doesn't want this story in this way, in this time, right? And do I change the story? Do I look at it in a new way and change myself, right? And then it'll flow. Or you say, put it to the side, and I'm going to write something that I'm burning to write, because maybe that's the interruption, right? Yeah, I want to do that, but I've got this thing I've got to get out right now. Get that thing out. I'm back to the other thing. But I don't know a single writer who doesn't have mangled and mutilated and unfinished writings, you know, hither and yon all over their metaphorical office or folder or head or file cabinet or house.
Where they just stop.
Yeah, where you just stop. I mean, I think everybody does that, or they make a wrong turn and screw it up, and then don't come back to it. I think every writer does that. I think, you know, when a big famous writer dies, his public, you know, paper, all of his papers go to a university, and what do? They pick through all of the mutilated manuscripts it didn't end up publishing or even finishing in some cases, right? You're not obliged to finish something. It doesn't make you a good writer because you finished or a bad writer because you didn't. some things are just getting you to the next thing, right? I had to work out these ideas, and I stopped at the point where I was done with that, and then went to something else because it was whatever I did there taught me something that I can use later in another thing, right? It's not a linear process, it's a human process, and it's not supposed to be efficient. Machines are efficient. Human beings are messy and incomplete and fragmented and difficult, and the damnedest creatures. But machines can't write novels. I mean, they could throw that into an algorithm and make something and study stories and have Google do it, I suppose, but I wouldn't call it a novel and I wouldn't call it art. It has to come from a human being, a flawed, troubled, mistaking, silly, wonderful human being, in order for it to be art.
Kind of like what's happened on the music side when they went in to see Princess Balls.
Yeah.
They just all of it.
Yeah.
Unfinished.
Yeah, unfinished. And I think every author and every artist, for that matter, must have that.
And some of them have actual finished work though too that they've just put aside. You know, there was definitely, you know, when Dr. Seuss passed, he had like several manuscripts that were completely done. He just hadn't like done anything. And Steinbeck the same way. He had a couple manuscripts
a
and
novel about werewolves and big stir, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So I take that as proof of concept. If Steinbeck liked it and wrote it, and I got the same idea, must be a good idea. I'm there for it, right?
I know, right?
But I really think there's a branding, like advertising thing happening here, where it's like if you write horror, then you know you can't write children's books because you're a horror writer. Like we try and shoehorn you into, well, if you're a poet, you're not an essayist, or you're this, and you're that. You did fiction, so you're a fiction writer. That kind of thing, and it's. I think that's very artificial. I don't think people work that way in real life, but it seems to be the way that the arting public or the art consuming public has been groomed to understand things. And we're more than the sum total of that. You can write anything, and if it works, it works. And if it doesn't work, do something else or try again. But in any event, I think it has much to do with our ability to conceptualize what box something fits into.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, I mean, real life doesn't fit into a nice, neat box, almost ever. So maybe we want art to fit into a box because it will make more sense to us than life does. So if there are no more questions, I'm happy to sign books. And I want to say, you spend a lot of hours playing around with words, and it's very gratifying when people take the time to read them or take the time to come out and support you. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for hosting me. Thank you for coming out and listening and asking questions. And I hope that you get something out of my scribbles.
Yay! Thank you. And this once again was Joshua Converse
Bye, Internet.
at Downtown Book and Sound, and with his two books, Manny's Daughter, which just came out, and The Diana Strain, which is the first book in this two-book.
Soon to be re-released with a brand new cover.
Awesome. All right, thank you very much. We're going to sign off on the broadcast here.